Howdy gamers, and games are too political nowadays. I miss the good old 7th generation of consoles before developers were shoving politics into Animal Crossing. We had stuff like BioShock, Fallout 3, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, Mass Effect 2. There are a lot of video games out there. The last I checked, more than 5, and as a result, there are many I know I'll never get around to playing. Like, I'm fine if I die tomorrow knowing I never got to tell my crush how I feel about her. However, I would be pretty disappointed I never got to play through the Resident Evil games. Who knows, maybe God has a mini fridge of Mountain Dew along with an Xbox Series X up in heaven, and he'll let me play through the Yakuza series after I'm done praying for the day, but something tells me that's not how the afterlife is. That means I need to pick the games I play carefully, and considering 1/6 of the games I've beaten this year have been from the Wario Land series, I'm not doing a good job at that. So, as a remedy, I thought I'd get into one of the series I've always wanted to. Metal Gear. It's a massive franchise, both in the number of games, popularity, and just how well received the games generally are. That can mean it's hard to know where to start, especially with the storyline as convoluted as this series. Should I start with Metal Gear Solid 3, the first chronologically? Metal Gear Solid, when the series first debuted as we know it today, or Metal Gear. I decide to play the last game chronologically that plays nothing like the other entries. Metal Gear Rising Revengeance released in 2013 and takes place in the far-off year of 2018. It was developed by Platinum Games but published by Konami, with Kojima heavily working on the story. That means you get the amazing action game combat of something from Platinum Games with the writing that Kojima is known for. Between the two, I was honestly most surprised by the writing because this was genuinely the funniest game I've ever played. Most games will just make me exhale through my nose extra hard or maybe make me think, oh that was funny, but rarely will a game have me laugh out loud. Somehow, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance had me laughing out loud multiple times while playing. This game is so freaking over the top, but it acts serious the whole way through, never once cracking a smile, which I adore. The best way to describe it is as a 10-year-old's idea of what an M-rated game should be, making for such a unique and memorable game. For example, there's a point where Raiden is running down a falling clock tower vertically, while missiles are being shot at him from a robot that he just dodges and then he cuts the robot in half with a freaking sword. And that's just within the first 20 minutes. The game is never satisfied and is always trying to top itself. It's not just the set pieces that are over the top either. The characters are the exact same way, spouting cheesy one-liners that all fall flat in the best way possible. Some people are only on screen for a small portion of the game, but manage to be extremely memorable because they make their presence known with how bombastic they can be. Although, when I said I was going to talk about the writing of this game, you probably assumed I meant the story, and as much as I would love to talk about other parts I loved, like the insane amount of blood coming out of literal robots, I suppose I can do that too. Overall, it's safe to say that it's the weakest part of the game, at least for me. I wouldn't call it predictable by any means, but there really aren't any crazy twists, nor was I ever at the edge of my seat. The story felt more like a means to an end for other things the game wanted to focus on. Instead of focusing on telling a gripping narrative, the game opts for exploring philosophical and political themes, in the same game where you have a sword foot you use to kill cyborgs. Philosophically, it focuses on conflict, ideological thinking, and culture, while politically it's a huge critique of the United States war on terror, as well as the industrial military complex. Personally, as much as I would love to go more into those themes, I'm literally 17 and spend my AP Literature class in the back playing Mario Kart, and can barely explain why I find the controls in Sonic are fun. Therefore, I'm going to leave that to someone more qualified. However, I will say there is a lot to be discussed on that aspect. That's why I felt it was important to mention them, because although the story is nothing crazy, thanks to the themes it presents and the over-the-top nature of the game, it still manages to be engaging. Anyways, now that we've gotten the Kojima out of the way, I can move on to the Platinum Games aspect. The base combat that the game presents is pretty simple. I played the Xbox port, so I don't know what buttons are used on PS3, and I'm gonna pray to God that no one has played this using keyboard controls, but you press X to do a light attack and Y to perform a heavy attack. Additionally, there are combos that you press X and Y in specific orders to do. Personally, I'm not a fan of that because I like the Smash Bros type of combos where you have a base set of attacks and you can string those into combos based on your knowledge of them, not memorizing that YYXY does a low roundhouse, but YYX does a triple kick upswing. my hand can only fit so many combinations on it. Not to mention, memorizing over 20 different attacks doesn't seem fun. Thankfully, the game doesn't really require that you remember all of these different moves. In fact, I got by just button mashing Y to attack. Since the game is a style system, you might assume that only pressing Y to attack would lower that, but as far as I can tell, no. I managed to get an S rank once or twice despite my strategy, or I guess lack thereof one. However, I'm not exactly happy about it. Believe me, I would hate to have to memorize combos, so I'm thankful I don't, since I prefer to memorize the Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix instruction manual, but just spamming one button to attack was disappointing. It's repetitive and unengaging. I would have preferred something like No More Heroes where you have to change up your attack based on how the enemy is defending. That doesn't mean I dislike the combat though, because there are two systems I haven't mentioned yet, parrying and blade mode, that made it great. I know parrying is in a lot of video games nowadays to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if the next Mario game had one, but I love the way it's done here. By pressing X in the direction of the attack, you'll put your sword out in front of you and deflect almost anything. It's extremely satisfying to pull off because of the sparks that fly off your sword mixed with the sound. In addition, all of the attacks are extremely well choreographed, so if you miss a parry, it hardly feels like the game's fault. Before an attack, all the enemies have a red flash, leaving a small but fair window open. Although not all attacks are able to be parried, and when that's the case, there's a yellow flash, meaning you'll have to dodge out of the way. This allows bosses to throw 5 attacks in a row at you, but it still feels fair and amazing when you pull off the chain of parries. Unfortunately, it isn't perfect. Sometimes you'll do the input, but the game won't register it correctly, and you'll do an attack instead. It's really frustrating since you'll take unnecessary damage and often be vulnerable to a follow-up attack. Sure, it does make for a good excuse if you attacked instead of parried, however, I'd say it wasn't worth keeping in. It probably could have been fixed just by binding the parry to a separate button, but thankfully it doesn't happen often, at most only 1 out of 100 times. As for the aforementioned blade mode, I can't help but love it. Sometimes in combat, after hitting someone in a specific spot enough times, you'll see it glow blue, letting the player know that, hey, wouldn't it be pretty cool and funny if you cut that off? It could be a leg, an arm, or a leg that looks like an arm. It doesn't matter. You can cut it off, and then the enemy will have to continue the fight missing a limb. They'll even change the way they attack based off of this, which is such a freaking cool detail, but it goes further than that. If you do enough damage, their whole body will glow blue, allowing for Zendatsu. It's Japanese for slash, and Metal Gear Rising Revengeance for letting the player know that they can get a critical kill. A red box appears on the enemy, and then by lining up the sword and slashing with the right analog stick, you can cut clean through them, and even seize their spinal cord or electrolyte module to get a full heal. There will be really intense moments in combat, where you'll be low on health, being attacked by multiple enemies, only to pull off a full heal at the last second. The mechanic is even used further in boss fights for some creative battles, but I won't spoil any of that because it surprisingly has one final use. It might just be the coolest part of the game because it allows you to cut a lot of things in the environment. Obviously, not everything is cuttable, but you'd be surprised, and it's not a total gimmick either. For example, at one point there's an annoying enemy on a bridge above me, but instead of going up there to attack, I was able to cut down the bridge's supports to bring him down to me. I don't think deforestation has ever been this much fun, so thanks Platinum Games. Of course, this is still a Metal Gear game, meaning there's stealth. Outside of one very short segment, it's entirely optional, although I did find it fun to sneak behind enemies and then take them out. I'd often try to sneak around as much as possible before getting caught and then eventually fighting whatever remained. Me essentially skipping enemy encounters doesn't mean I hate the combat though, it's just the game throws a lot of the same enemies at you over and over again, so being able to skip some encounters and go at my own pace in a way was nice. At the very least, they do all have their own attack patterns, movement, and parry windows, so encountering someone new for the first time is always exciting. As well, for the most part, the game does a good job at pairing up different types of enemies, so you might be fighting Mastiff number 56, however, there's a few sliders thrown in, so you have to change up the way you go about taking them down. So, overall, I'd say the encounters are well designed. I just wish there was a tiny bit more variety. However, the game is pretty short, so it's not the end of the world. Plus, the game was sure to put a lot of effort into the boss fights. These are some of my favorite out of any video game ever. Just everything about them is well done. Almost all of them have some sort of build up beforehand where we get to see their campy personalities shine before we're thrown head to head in a deathmatch. From there, they pretty much all have a unique gimmick to their fight that causes them to stand out more, along with differing attack patterns, movement, and parry windows. The boss fights are also tough too, but with a really good skill curve, so although for the first couple you can get by without parrying, eventually it becomes essential and makes the boss fights even more fun. Also, by tough, don't go in expecting something like Dark Souls. At most they took an hour to beat, and even then that was only for 1 or 2 fights. Oftentimes, once you get the movement of them down, it's only a few more tries. And if you are having trouble with a boss, there's always healing items, which admittedly I never use, so I probably spent longer on fights than needed. The game never really pressures you to heal yourself, which I appreciated since to me it was more fun, and was a great ego boost, but I would completely understand if someone found repeating a boss fight non-enjoyable and just used them. But arguably, the more time doing a boss fight the better, since it means you get to hear the boss themes for longer. I'm a bit surprised I've gone this long without mentioning this soundtrack, because oh my god, this is one of the best soundtracks out of any video game. Just like Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance itself, the music is so over the top to the point where I'm convinced anyone over the age of 60 would get a heart attack upon listening to it. Apparently it's electronic rock, although it definitely leans more towards the rock part, with a lot of guitars and drums being played fast to match the fast-paced gameplay. What makes it even better though is that in boss fights, the music is adaptive, meaning it changes in response to what's going on in the game. As you progress further through the fight, more instruments and vocals get added in, making it more intense the further you get, and I absolutely love it. There's nothing quite like getting the boss to low health and hearing the vocals come in. Not to mention, the lyrics for each boss fight go along with who they are as a character, and sometimes even touch on the philosophical themes of the game, which just makes it even better. The music used for the normal combat sequences is okay. I don't know, it's pretty decent, but unfortunately they don't come close to how amazing the tracks for the boss fights are. Finally, there's a whole upgrade system where you can buy stuff using BP at the end of each chapter, but to be fully honest, I didn't care about it too much. You can buy most of the stuff on your first playthrough, so it doesn't add replayability, and a lot of the things you can purchase are combo related, meaning I didn't care. However, it's still decent since it added a collectible to look for when playing, and the upgrades that I did care about were nice to have and added a sense of progression. That was Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Although it's by no means my favorite action game of all time, I still loved it. There's so much about it to like, from the writing, the characters, to the enjoyable combat, that made it hard to put down. That's why to give it a score of 100, I'd give it a 90 out of 100. If you want to check it out yourself, there seems to be some common misconception that the game's exclusive to PS3, but that's just not the case. It's backwards compatible on Xbox, as well as available on Steam. Finally, to give this game an award, I'd give it the Best Metal Gear Game Award. Of course, having said that, I should probably get around to playing literally any other game in the series. I'm sure that they'll play just like this one, and I'll have no problem adjusting to the nature of the series. Where the frick is my robot dog, and who's Solid Snake?